Hello, welcome back to the Winning Agenda. My name's Jesse Muleman Marshall, and I'm here with a deck tech on Bravo Star of the Show, which I'm very, very happy to say was a successful ProQuest winning deck for me yesterday. I've just got back from Adelaide, which, for those of you who aren't Australian, is a city that's about an hour's flight or 8 to 9 hours drive from here in Melbourne. Myself and Isaac, who's featured in a few of our Winning Agenda videos recently, took the trip over together. Which is really nice to be able to do because we've spent a couple of years in lockdown, so haven't really been able to do many interstate trips, in and out of lockdown, and haven't been able to do many interstate trips, particularly for card games, and it was very nice to be able to get back to that. So thanks to my good friend Isaac for accompanying me on the trip and for suggesting the idea in the first place, and for all the testing and great work that he put into helping me to put this deck together in the last week or so. Shout out also to the Star City Games top 8 players, who I think there were 6 of them who played Bravo, Star of the Show, this new hero into a brand new meta. That was extremely brave of them. No one's played this deck in any tournament before, or no one's played any variation of this hero, and they all took slightly varying builds, and I've drawn different bits and elements from different builds there, as well as a few things that I learnt in our testing with Isaac and myself in the last week or so. And I just wanted to kind of talk through the deck, some of the card choices, some things you might want to consider, and some of the things that were important for me in my tournament yesterday. So to start off with, I think there are a couple of ways you can approach a Bravo Star of the Show deck. I should say the deck list is in the description of the video below if you want to follow along with an actual deck list while we're going through this visually. So with the hero ability, there are kind of a couple of ways you can think about this. So you've got the actual essence ability, which gives you this enormous card pool. And then you've got the essentially fuse ability, where you can reveal one of each of the elements from your hand to get your next attack with cost 3 or greater, gains +2, dominate, and go again. When I first read the card, I was sort of thinking, well, what if you play a Guardian heavy deck, playing all the good traditional Bravo cards, but just put in like a few really key, excellent element cards. Basically, start off with Crippling Crush and Oaken Old. Like, this is the first deck where you can go Crippling Crush and Oaken Old together. Oaken Old being an elemental attack. And then you've got a few really great element cards, such as Channeling Frigid. I thought maybe Tome of Harvest, things like that. And that was kind of where the build went initially. But what we've set it on here, and what I think became clear from a bit more testing, and certainly from that tournament at Star City Games last week, was that there is a lot of power in using Bravo's ability, fusing it as often as possible, and turning the cards that you use that are perhaps not as powerful. Like, I don't think anyone 2 months ago would have thought we'd see a constructed deck with 9 Autumn's Touches and 5 Breakgrounds doing particularly well, let alone a constructed deck with, blue Shock Strikers and a blue Lightning Surge in it. I certainly didn't think I'd be playing a deck like that. But what the hero ability does is it means that even though you're playing these cards, which are pretty garbage and well below rate, in the case of something like Lightning Surge, well, not well below rate, but just not very good, particularly compared to the other blues that Guardians have access to. Like, you're playing blue Lightning Surge over blue Disable, which is clearly just a far more powerful card, particularly when you're already playing, 31 other blues. But what the hero ability allows you to do is it rewards you so much for fusing by turning these mediocre attacks in particular, these earth attacks, into really powerful threats. Because any Autumn's Touch, even starting from the least powerful being the blue, if you attack with it, becomes a 7 dominate go again. And that's really respectable. I mean, it's excellent for a blue. It means that you're probably chipping in damage or soaking up equipment each time you're able to get that ability off. So if you're able to consistently do it over the first 5 or 6 turns, say 3 or 4 times, even more often perhaps if you can set up with Crown of Seas, which we'll come to in a minute, you're sending out consistent threats that are able to do a consistent amount of damage and consistently chip in at their life total. Plus have go again to allow you to follow up with Icy Hammer. So if you've got both these attacks, the ability to pay for them, the ability to fuse, and then the ability to come in with a blue ice card to come in with your hammer, then you've got pretty powerful turns off 4-card hands. The really important thing, though, is that your damage output in that scenario is going to be like medium to high consistently. but you're still going to get run over by aggro decks who just want to hold 4 or 5 card hands and then come back at you with even more damage and on-hit triggers, and then that breaks up your ability to trigger Bravo, and it breaks up the power of your kind of mediocre Autumn's Touches if you're not fusing Bravo. So this is where the other really key element of the deck comes in, and that's the red Guardian attacks. So you're still then coming back to, you've got Oaken Old and Crippling Crush as well as Spinal, and then Pulverize as potentially a finisher, as cards with powerful on-hit effects that if you can set up your Bravo ability with these cards, you're able to disrupt. So at a very macro level, that's the things that the deck is trying to do. It's trying to use the Oaken Olds, the Crippling Crushes as kind of your 6 main shots, like your 6 big attacks, potentially recycling Oaken Olds with Pulse of Candlehold. And then every turn trying to chip in a bit of damage and take away a bit of equipment potentially, if you're able to fuse, and then go into a red 3 for 7, which becomes 3 for 9 dominate, and hopefully keep a bit of momentum as well as a bit of disruption from the hammer. So that's kind of a broad overview of the game plan, and kind of the thinking behind the deck. So I'll go through some of the individual card choices. To start with, on the equipment side, Crown of Seeds supports this game plan perfectly, because you will often find that you have more resources than you need to be able to attack when most of your attacks cost 3 and your deck is full of blues. Cost 3 or less and your deck is full of blues. Obviously you have your Crippling Crush, Pulverize, Spinal, which are expensive, but the remainder of your attacks all cost 3 or less, so it's sort of 1 card to play and then the card itself. And particularly in the case of Oaken Old, you're often going to be fusing with 2 cards. So, off 4 cards, you ideally fuse Bravo with 3 of them, Oaken Old being the 4th. You pitch your blue to play the Oaken Old, fuse with the 2 other elements that you need, the Earth and Ice, and then you're left with 2 cards in hand. Hopefully then you can pitch the Ice card to come in with the hammer, and then you've still got potentially the Earth card in hand at the end of the turn, which you can arsenal. So that's like a really powerful turn and a really powerful play pattern of 4 cards. You're basically coming in with Oaken Old for 11, dominate, threatening to take 2 cards out of their hand, and then the hammer, which is threatening a frostbite and another 4 damage. So 15 damage with 2 disruptive effects and dominate on one of them. Supremely powerful turn. So if you can focus your deck around trying to do that and focus your play around trying to do that as often as possible, that's excellent. But the key aspect there is you're still also left with an arsenal card. So even on this massive turn that you're trying to build towards with your Oaken Olds, you're still very likely going to have a card left that you can arsenal. You can substitute that out for a Crippling Crush. And if you have either a 5-card hand using your Tunic resource to Crown of Seeds to get up 5 cards at the start of your turn in hand, you can then fuse Crippling Crush and then have a card left to put in your arsenal. Or if you use your Tunic counter as your last resource, pitch 2 blues, Crippling Crush, and you've still got a card left to arsenal. So even when you have your biggest turns, perhaps with the exception of Pulverize, you will often have a card in your arsenal. The other thing to mention, though, is that when you do have those big turns, prioritizing having the arsenal over attacking with the hammer sometimes can be really important. So that's probably one of the key gameplay pieces of advice that I would give, is the Crown of Seeds is so important and to your ability to keep fusing over and over again, because just getting that 5th card or being able to effectively cycle out a card from your hand on their turn so that you're improving your odds of bravoing is just really, really important for keeping up the momentum in the game. So giving yourself the chance to do that by holding back an extra card, even if you manage to fuse Bravo, attack with a big attack, and then you've got the choice about whether to come in with the hammer or to arsenal a card. A lot of the time, I'd say probably more than 50% of the time, I choose not to attack with the hammer, unless I'm getting them probably below 20 life, and then I think that life is starting to be a pressure point for them. Even then, there are times when I will still arsenal, depending on the game situation, depending on what my life total is, because it can help protect you on their turn, like you're getting a free block basically out of the Crown of Seeds at that point, and a cycle, and you're trading that for a bit of pressure and the disruption that you're putting back with the hammer potentially, but you're also, again, improving your opportunity to Bravo the following turn and try and take more momentum. So the deck is very much about prioritizing the Crown of Seeds activations and prioritizing using all of these element cards to fuse Bravo as often as possible and keep the pressure up. So Crown, extremely important to that game plan and extremely important to the consistency. Winter's Wail, which I've already mentioned, obviously the Frostbites on hit can be really important to stripping cards out of their hand because they want to block and avoid the Frostbite, or having that invidious choice of taking the damage, which is bad, obviously, for their life total, but also then having a Frostbite and not necessarily being able to do what they wanted to do on their turn. Tunic, you've obviously got two really powerful Guardian chess pieces in faction. You've got the new, I forget the name now, all of a sudden, but you know what I mean, and the new Temper one from Everfest, that can create seismic surges and synergizes with anything that draws you cards. But more importantly, you've got of Crippling Crush, Pulverize, etc. You're giving those up in order to play Tunic in this deck because of the interaction with Crown of Seeds, basically. Because it can allow you to have a 5-card hand by arsenaling, use the Tunic resource, Crown of Seeds, you get the prevention, and then you're drawing as well to have 5 cards in hand at the start of your turn, which is just so impactful when you have Bravo's ability that wants you to have cards in hand at that exact point in the game, being the start of your turn. So effects that draw you cards on your turn aren't as powerful, though they are still good, of course, to enabling your further plays, but the prioritization that this deck places on being able to fuse Bravo means that the Crown of Seeds Tunic interaction is really important and key to the consistency. Crater Fist, as always, just a really efficient 3 points of block over the game. But there are actually situations more so than in Bravo's Showstopper where you will activate your Crater Fist, particularly once it's blocked once, to get your Crippling Crush potentially up to 15. If you've fused Bravo, you've got an extra blue in hand because perhaps you played Tome of Fyendal or you have a 5-card hand. Maybe you have the resources to also crack the Crater Fist, and maybe you'd prefer to do that rather than come in with the hammer afterwards, or rather than have an arsenal card, perhaps if you just want to finish the game, and getting the Crippling Crush up to 15 is going to do it. So Crater Fist has both a relevant ability and a good block, and Stalagmite is a really interesting one. So this is my default shield in this deck, and I think for a lot of people they are defaulting to Rampart, in part because you will often have floating resources. You'll be pitching blues to Crown, and then you have these floating resources, so why not play Rampart? A couple of things on that is that the turns when you want to use the shield the most are often the ones when you kind of want to protect your key fuses, like your fuse into Oaken Old. And they're perhaps not the turns where you necessarily have to be pitching a blue. Maybe you draw like an extra Pulverize, like you've got a Pulverize and an Oaken Old. You want to be playing the Oaken Old. You've got then 2 elements in your hand, and you just want to pitch away the Pulverize, try and draw into your last element using the Crown ability, and you don't want to have to pitch a blue. In those situations, having the flexibility to just pitch reds and still be able to block with your shield to protect your hand can be really important. So the shield not costing mana is important, or not costing resources, but also the Frostbite can just be so crucial in a lot of the most important matchups. So I think the best way to attack this Starvo deck is to play, your own disruptive effects, your own on hit abilities, and just try and go over the top of the damage that it's putting out. And Stalagmite just helps to prevent your opponent from being able to do that on a couple of key turns in the early game. So that is the most important section of the game, because you're getting through the kind of slowish start sometimes to the deck and getting the gears moving and getting the Crown of Seeds working and getting that all happening. And if you've got this Stalagmite that can act as just a little bit of a handbrake on your opponent's development in those key turns, then you can start just running away with the momentum of the game. So I certainly found that to be helpful. Obviously, Rampart can be good in like an Oldhim matchup where you're just going to kind of slug it out a bit more. It can also be helpful in obviously the Dash matchup, where having that ability can be really good to use the shield over and over again on the turns that they want to go wide with their pistol. So I do have it there in the sideboard, but Stalagmite is kind of the primary shield. And then in terms of feat slot. Mage Master Boots is there because we do have this one tome in the sideboard. So as long as we're not playing Null Rune Boots, then we'll bring the tome in and have the Mage Master Boots. And that just gives us kind of this one turn at some point in the game, if we do happen to draw into the tome, that we get to just have a more powerful turn and gain a bit of life back. You could absolutely substitute the Mage Master Boots for Ironhide Legs to get that extra block, because you will sometimes have resources floating at some point in the game and you can just go, +2 life. But I do like having the tome, and sometimes the ability to just be like, I can block out a bit and wait till I draw my tome if the game's sort of teetering a bit, and then know that on that turn I'm just going to get an extra card and be able to hopefully do something big with one of my key attacks. So that is kind of the equipment side of things. You then got Heart of Ice and Shock Charmers, Arcane Lantern, self-explanatory. Shock Charmers is a difficult one. I think worth noting that it doesn't work with Crippling Crush. So you can't, if you hit for 3 damage with Crippling Crush, you can't Shock Charmers to make the Crush go off, because the Crush rules text, if you look at the comprehensive rules, says that the 4 damage has to be dealt in a single instance. So don't get confused by that, and don't go trying to make your opponents discard 2 if you Shock Charmers them. But sometimes you will have extra resources left over with this deck, and just being able to turn resources into damage can be good sometimes. If you are in a matchup where you think being aggressive is going to be more important, you might even consider playing it against something like Oldham, for example, where perhaps the Crater Fist, while it can be useful to defend some of their attacks, if their deck is just demanding that you get over their defenses, it just means that Shock Charmers can threaten to turn your first couple of attacks into more damage than they expect. And maybe that could work. But I didn't actually end up using the Shock Charmers at all, so you could certainly cut it from the sideboard. But it is also nice to have against Kano. You've got the 3 Null Rune, effectively, with the Arcane Lantern, and then you can just have a bit of extra block and something to bring in that kind of, does something relevant against Kano, both the Spell Void and the extra damage. Although, as I said, the Crater Fist ability is not irrelevant. In terms of the other key cards in the deck, so I've kind of gone through the role of these key attacks, the Guardian attacks, Oaken Old, Crippling Crush. Just you never play fewer than 6 of those, I don't think. Like, they are just so important, and they are the key shots that let you have inevitability, have disruption, and prevent your opponent from executing, but also finish the game. So absolutely play those. Pulverize, I think, is also really good and worth playing 2 of. You sometimes cut to 1 in some matchups, but I think you always want to have 1 in the deck so that it is an option for you to Awakening for it. The on-hit ability is something that can be overlooked, I think. There's a lot of text on Heave, and there's a lot going on this card, but that on-hit ability to be -4 to their next attack is just really huge and really relevant, and it doesn't have to Crush to do that. Obviously, Pulverize is quite hard to cast, but if you can cast it, it can also just help you close out games as well, even without the Bravo ability, just because 14 is more than most heroes can block if you've already got through their equipment with a 4-card hand. Entangle is basically there as another red attack that has an ability that is kind of slightly better than the other options in that slot. So your other options in that slot are to bring in like an Evergreen or something, which is an Earth card, so it improves your Earth Fusion for Oaken Old, but also for Starvo. But Entangle gives you a bit more disruption. So this is basically like a call saying, I think I've got enough Earth cards, and I think I can afford to play 1 more Guardian attack, and I want a 3-cost over something like a Mangle, which is also another option. But just being able to play it off 1 card, I think, makes this a little bit better than Mangle. And the on-hit effect, it's a hit rather than a Crush, meaning that it's more likely to go off than Mangle's Crush effect, for example. So that's why I opted for the Entangle in that slot. I've got 2 Spinal Crushes here in the main deck because I usually consider the third one as a matchup dependent question. So sorry that my video is cutting off the bottom 3 cards there. There's an Awakening, a Remembrance, and a Spinal Crush at the bottom of the sideboard. Spinal Crush number 3 and Awakening number 3. I will bring in, so you can see there's 2 Awakening there too in the main deck. I will bring in if the matchup requires it. So I'll always play Spinal Crush number 3 against other aggro decks, so like a Lexi or a Katsu, or anything that is going to want to use Go Again, any of the Rune Blades, for example. Awakening number 3 also good against other aggro decks, less relevant against decks that are going to kind of demand that you maintain pressure on them, or can deal you heaps of damage at once. So it's okay against Lexi, but in that it can help you turn things around, but I'd rather just have things that allow me to stay on the front foot more against Lexi, for example. But, you know, it is kind of another insurance policy you can bring in. But I think a better example is Viserai. Like, Viserai can deal you heaps of damage at once, so I won't bring in the Third Awakening against Viserai because kind of they're likely to be behind on life, especially if they go a more OTK build. But even if they don't, I back this deck to be able to, on the average turn, deal more damage than the Viserai is dealing. It's just that Viserai is going to have a couple of really spiky turns, potentially even where they can either kill you outright, or threaten to kill you outright, or put you very close to lethal. So having the Awakenings can sometimes be a bit of a whiff against Viserai. But the third Spinal Crush I play more often than not. The two Sink Belows are basically just there for Lexi. You might consider playing them in the mirror, but I would just play the 3 Turn Timbers. They're there for the mirror because, you know, they cost 2, which works really nicely. Pitcher Blue, Crown of Seeds, play Turn Timber, and they block for 8, which is massive for only 2 resources. So big fan of that. Tome of Fyendal, as I mentioned, you'll play when you're not playing Null Rune. And the Pummels, you know, they're a really interesting one. I have a love-hate relationship with Pummel. I'm sure most people do. It can be a really bad card, but it can just win you the game. It works with your hammer as well as your 3-cost attacks. 3-cost and up, or 2-cost and up, but I don't think we have any 2 costs in this build. Oh yeah, we've got the Icing Cows and the Winter's Grasp, but they basically never get cast. So yes, it works with a lot of your attacks and is relevant. It's just that, you know, tax of being basically 2 extra cards means that you aren't going to be arsenaling, and that's fine. You know, most of the time when you play a Pummel, you won't be arsenaling. But what it does do is it improves those turns where you're just Autumn's Touching or Break Grounding. It means that you're likely to hit, you're likely to have some disruption on those turns and make them discard a card, as well as get a bit more damage in. So against decks where they might try and pivot on you, and you think having more effects that will disrupt their hand is really crucial to preventing them from pivoting back, playing the Pummels can be good, because it can just help extend your turns a little bit, and it also, I think, improves your average damage output per turn. So that covers off on the sideboard. Red Lightning Surge is really cool because particularly against decks that are going to sit back a bit more or might have off turns, if you can get those Red Lightning Surges into your arsenal, you can crown them away, and you don't really care if you crown them away and you've got better things to do. But if they don't threaten with enough that you want to or need to crown, or if your hand's great anyway, they just become this extra 4 damage that you can add on to your turn for free. So they're just a really nice extra aggressive option that improves the deck's average damage output, which I really like, as well as helping you fuse. And it's worth mentioning too that the lightning part of the deck in terms of playing the cards is probably the weakest. So having some lightning cards that you can play is good, so you don't just end up with heaps of lightning and none of the other elements, because of course you are actually playing a lot of your earth cards out, and you are playing some of your ice cards out, particularly Channel Lake Frigid, but also you don't mind if there are more ice cards left later, because you can use those to a little bit better effect in terms of the hammer, but also Oaken Old. So yeah, having a lightning card that you can actually get out of your deck by playing it for good effect can be good. We've got the 3 pulses, so the Volthaven, Candlehold, and Eisenloft. Volthaven, usually the weakest because it doesn't block, it pitches for 1, and it only affects some of your attacks, crucially not any of your earth attacks. But I still play it anyway because fusing is just so important. Fusing Bravo is so important for the deck, and it does affect the hammer, crucially. So because the Winter's Wail is an elemental hammer, the Pulse of Volthaven does work on it. And a 0 for 4 buff on your hammer, yeah, that's actually a pretty decent card. I know it doesn't block, I know it pitches for 1, but the combination of working on the hammer and helping you so massively with your fusion math means that Pulse still makes it in the deck, and the other 2 are just really solid cards that are worth playing anyway. The other things worth mentioning, so 3 of the blue block 3s in both Ice and Lightning, Heaven's Claws and Winter's Grasp. Blizzard and Blink are both instants, so don't block, but you are pitching so often, particularly because of Crown, that having a couple more instants in your deck isn't quite as catastrophic. You can get caught out, particularly when you've got Awakening, Blink, and Blizzard in the deck, plus the Pulse of Volthaven, and Pulse obviously doesn't pitch as well as the others because it only pitches for one, and it means you can't, pitch it and Crown and Awakening or Turn Timber. But yeah, you can cycle away your instants, I guess is what I'm saying. So playing them is not so bad, and their actual effects are useful. So Blink is great in the Prism matchup, letting you kill an extra aura. Blizzard, I actually played quite a few times yesterday against Lexi, really disruptive. Against Bolton, it can be good. Against Katsu, it can obviously be good. Just those aggro decks that are low to the ground can't often afford the extra 2 resources, and stopping 1 or 2 extra attacks from them can just be really huge. Like it can be a massive turnaround, and that might mean that you don't get to hammer on your next turn and you just do an attack, but that's usually worth it in terms of the tempo trade. Winter's Bite is actually a really good card in the deck. Stripping an extra card out of their hand can just be huge. There are situations where you don't get a full extra card, particularly if they pitch for the Winter's Bite and then also use the remaining floating resources to pay for a defense reaction. You're not getting an extra card then, but if you do end up in situations where you've Tunic crowned, got a 5-card hand, and you're not using more than 3 of them, so you'll end up with an arsenal card and you'll have a spare card. Having something like Winter's Bite that costs 0 and does something relevant most of the time is really cool to have in the deck. Channel Lake Frigid, just a really great disruptive ability to have in your deck, to both have the ice cards to support it, the blues to be able to cast it and have floating resources, and a proactive game plan that doesn't require it, but means that the tempo hit that it gives to your opponent can open the gate for you to do something really damaging. Just makes this a great card to have in the deck. It's one of the most powerful and one of the best things to do, particularly early in the game, to just open up that opening for you to take control of the game and then keep the pressure on them turn after turn. So love to see an early Channel Lake Frigid. And that, I think, probably wraps it up. So hopefully that's been useful for you in understanding some of the card choices, some of the strategy, some of the ways that you might go about playing the deck. As I said, prioritize the arsenal, prioritize setting up for your 6 big attacks, your Oaken Olds and your Crippling Crushes, which are big because they disrupt as well. That's the key. As well as obviously Spinal Crush, which can not disrupt in quite the same way, but can definitely put a break on aggro decks coming back at you the other way, and force those blocks when perhaps they don't want to. So thank you for watching. Thanks to Isaac again for all the help with testing, and hope you all go really well with your ProQuests and enjoy the rest of the season. We'll be back with deck tech on Viserai deck and a bit more of a chat about ProQuests and everything else very soon. Thanks for watching. I've been Jesse for The Winning Agenda.